Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com, and it's time for another news roundup, this one for July 2022. As always with our news roundups, I'm joined by associate editor Eamon McCarthy-Earls. Hey, Eamon, welcome.
Thanks, Jason. Great to be here.
Great to have you. So this particular discussion is happening right before the big partner event of the year for Microsoft, Inspire 2022. So I wanted to take this opportunity to look back at some recent news and features that I think will still come into play as Microsoft takes the stage for their big partner event, and some of the themes that I expect will be coming up, that I think some of our contributors have suggested they think will be coming up. So let's get into it here. I wanted to start with something that's a little older, but still highly relevant for the partner channel, and that was the departure from Microsoft of Rodney Clark. He was the channel leader. He is leaving the company for a new executive role. In fact, he's already left the company, and he's taken up a new executive role at Johnson Controls. They are a long-time and very serious partner, very close partner of Microsoft. In trying to make sense of this, it was a pretty major, I thought anyway, a pretty major departure before the sort of typical reshuffling of executive leadership and different roles that people kind of tend to get at the start of the new fiscal year for Microsoft. We had some commentary, interestingly, actually back in May after this happened from Jay McBain. He's an analyst, and he mentioned on a podcast, on a webcast of ours, that perhaps this is. Clark's departure is sort of a signal that the channel chief role is not necessarily a fast track to sort of the executive suite the way it used to be, or the way some might think of it. And he pointed to the trend toward sort of ecosystem leadership or ecosystem chief as the kind of the CEO direct report nowadays in a lot of big enterprise technology firms. And the ecosystem chief sort of changes the focus toward the broader ecosystem, not just what partners are doing. And I think that's an interesting observation, and certainly one that, is worth continuing to watch.
Yeah, one of the other interesting announcements from recent weeks was the announcement of Viva Sales as sort of a new CRM companion.
Right, and this was something that sort of marks a bit of a shift in the approach to the Viva product line, which started with sort of HR and talent-focused capabilities, broad applicability to different roles in a company. Now what we have is a sales-focused tool set, which is a role-focused tool set. And I think Microsoft is hinting that there will be more role-based Viva applications. Just to foreshadow a bit on something else we're going to talk about, we also learned that the business applications team was responsible for product management of Viva Sales, which pulls in integration to CRMs. For now, I think it's D365 and also Salesforce, and they'll presumably be able to connect to more CRMs soon for data on leads, opportunities, things like that, accounts, along with data from the range of other Microsoft, from I guess you say throughout the Microsoft graph. I think documents. Contacts and interactions that are outside of CRM, and sort of pulling them together and putting them into different interfaces. So it's an interesting approach, and we'll see how well it gets taken up and what kind of companies express an interest in it.
You and I, of course, both focus very heavily on new acquisitions, new partnerships, things like that in the channel. And certainly one of the interesting ones recently was the sort of manufacturing announcement with Microsoft and Procter & Gamble. In terms of kind of their collaboration in the manufacturing space.
I certainly expect this one to be in focus, at least at some point during Inspire. Microsoft loves to obviously focus on the strength of its partnerships, especially the strength of its industry partnerships, and what that means for the company's own tech and what its partners are doing. Just looking out at that announcement, it included investments in Azure Iot Hub, IoT Edge, HoloLens 2, D365 Remote Assist. So obviously a range of investments from P&G, and yeah, I think it's one of those sort of tentpole partnerships where the investments made by the customer in this case hopefully will sort of elevate some of the core Azure IoT stories Microsoft's trying to get out there.
Well, obviously, a moment ago we talked about Viva Sales, and that's actually kind of a nice segue because one of the other things that I know you kind of discussed with Steve Mordue and with Charles about Charles
With
Lamanna,
Steve about Charles, yeah.
yes, was some of the details about Viva Sales. So, could you tell me a little bit more about your interview with Steve on the podcast?
Yeah, so my interview with Steve was really a chance to sort of talk about his interview with Microsoft CVP Charles Lamanna, who leads the business applications team overall now, as we've already covered on the site. And in this case, it was just looking at some of the highlights of that interview with Steve and getting a little bit more of his perspective on what it meant. We talked about the product leadership team that Charles now has and who those people are. We also talk about some of his outlook on the relationship between Power Platform and D365 and the idea that Power Platform adoption will hopefully for them lead to more D365 deals, which I think is an interesting and sort of debatable concept. Viva Sales as well, which he touched on, which Lamanna was involved in, or his team was involved in. And I think just some of the leadership challenges that anyone in that role has in this sort of Microsoft environment. It's definitely not the same place it was a year or two ago, and certainly not back when Lamanna's predecessor sort of took over this role. James Phillips, who's now gone from Microsoft, but there is some continuity there, and I think you can kind of trace a line to this point from the time Phillips took over. So really, a nice time to hear, I think, from Steve and his perspective, and also in that discussion, I'll just say we also talk about some of the challenges for partners these days, how partners really make the most of the Power Platform opportunity, which is something Steve is very focused on.
Of course, one of the things we always keep up with is recent announcements and big changes in the product or in the channel generally. Could you tell me a little bit more about your sort of take on the updates around Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations with kind of the Power Platform Admin Center management option, as well as other takeaways you had from the 2022 Release Wave 2 announcements?
Yeah, I wanted to just mention that coverage we did of that transition to Power Platform Admin Center, because I think it's something that could come up in the context of Inspire, because for partners, it's obviously very important to know how their clients are going to be managing their F&O resources, their F&O assets. It's a complicated matter already, and it's something that requires constant sort of management and oversight. So I assume partners will have some questions and want to know exactly what is going on with that transition, how that administration is really going to be changing or managed, and what they'll need to do to prepare for it. And then regarding Release Wave 2, I won't say a ton about Release Wave 2 for 2022 because the plans just came out. We should have something up ourselves. But yeah, I mean, it's another broad-based sort of set of plans for, October 2022 through March 2023, covering everything from governance to feature updates to developer updates, administrative changes, tools for administrators that are changing. So, I mean, really a ton to dive into there, and I think preview access to those features begins across various products starting in August.
Well, as usual, our key focus in the podcast is on Microsoft Business Apps. So I'll only touch a little bit on some of the reporting that I've been doing on the Azure side of things. But Jason, I did want to call out one kind of interesting development recently, which was the announcement from Orca Security, an independent security firm, of the so-called Synlapse, Synapse Analytics vulnerability that they discovered right around the start of the year that lasted for about 100 days as Microsoft went through a series of 3 different patches until it was eventually resolved. But this is a pretty striking one because this actually involved the possibility of cross-tenant attacks, which is something we haven't really seen a lot of in many of the vulnerabilities we've heard about in recent years, apart from things like the SolarWinds breach back at the tail end of 2020. So definitely an interesting development, and I'm sure will continue to have an impact in how customers think about security in context of Azure and other Microsoft products.
Yeah, I think it's really important for customers to understand what some of these vulnerabilities are. They can be difficult to understand in sort of a technical level because, I mean, when you sort of read the briefings of what these researchers are doing to try to get in, I mean, they're acting like hackers, right? To find any vulnerability they can and to take advantage of it. And like you said, this particular one was pretty worrisome in A, how long it took for Microsoft to resolve, and B, what it meant for cross-tenant, which is one of those areas where I think clients really assume that that's never going to be a risk, and that's of all the things you count on for a cloud provider. That's that tenant level security is one of their real mainstays. So absolutely, and it's something we'll have to continue to watch.
Well, turning our attention now, I did just want to call out some of our feature contributors. There's obviously so many people to mention and to get to with great features in every single case, but just a few that I think are useful to call out. A piece by James Crowder about Dynamics 365 Business Central priorities this year was a kind of interesting perspective, informed by his Days of Knowledge Nordics visit and some of the discussions that he had there.
Yeah, this is a sort of a continuation of a bit of a tradition now that I think we can call it a tradition. It's the third year in a row that he's written this kind of an article for us. Really grateful to have it from him. I think his viewpoint is really one that people tend to pay attention to because he's such a veteran of the Business Central and AV space. He now also has leadership over the Directions for Partners organization in Europe. They run Directions EMEA. And this, like you said, the days of knowledge type of events like the one they just had, and he has, a list of I think it was going to be 10, and it went to 11 priorities that he recommends for Microsoft. I'll let the readers go and check those out. I think there's a range of things. He still, they touch on app source. It touches on deprecation of features and just perhaps suspending that. New ability to query. I'm just looking through the list here as I talk. So all sorts of things there. Really a great piece and worth a read if you're at all interested in Business Central.
I want to call out two recent contributions on the Azure side of things. One from Your Way in Our Door, who's always got a great perspective on all things Azure, particularly in the context of U.S. federal agencies. He had a really interesting piece about setting up multi-tenant projects and the trend toward doing that increasingly among U.S. federal agencies. So that's a really interesting read for anyone with any kind of interest in the government space or multi-tenant projects generally. And Kirk Donahoe, who's also an excellent source of insight, particularly on data warehousing, data lakes, and so forth. He had a piece that I found really compelling about the ways that customers can prepare for Azure Synapse Link for Dataverse. So those are both some pretty interesting contributions recently over on the Azure side.
Absolutely. Like you said, Our is right on the front lines of these types of federal projects. So always great to get his perspective. And Kirk, likewise, on the front lines of data-focused projects for business applications.
And we've also had some great contributions from Dana Wilmer, a look at sort of the situation for Dynamics VARs right now in terms of median services margins and some of the trends going on in that field. Similarly, we have some perspectives from AJ Ansari on sort of the viewpoint of a Microsoft MVP, looking at the question of renewal and what's changed within the field, as well as a piece on D365 finance and supply chain management business value. Other pieces from Salman Hashmi about B2B e-commerce for manufacturers, guidance on Dynamics GP, Loeb for Power Platform. The list goes on. We have a pretty extensive list of recent features that I certainly encourage our listeners to go ahead and check out.
Absolutely. I'd certainly call out, of all those ones you mentioned, the recent piece by AJ on his reflections of becoming an MVP for another year. I think it's a little different than our typical article, but he really lays out with some nice clarity and great sentiment what his experience has been over the last few years, receiving the MVP award and then continuing to to hold on to it and the adjustments there and the pressure and some of the sort of expectations versus the reality of sort of doing the things that sort of made him an MVP in the first place. So really an interesting perspective there. And I think whether you're interested in working toward MVP level contributions or just want to know sort of what the perspective is from someone who does as much as AJ does out in the community, really worth a read. All right. Well, Eamon, thanks for sort of taking us through such a range of pieces there. I think we're going to wrap it up there. I just want to call out a couple other things. First, we're absolutely going to be covering the Inspire 2022 event that Microsoft is holding virtually this year. We're going to be covering the briefings, covering the presentations, hopefully getting some reaction from the channel itself. I know we have a post-event partner chat webcast that I'll link to. And if I could just call out one other little bit of promotion for ourselves, we just launched the MSDW Job Board. It is just a new feature on MS Dynamics World in particular, where you can find the latest job listings from a real range of Microsoft partners of various sorts. So check that out. It's in the main menu on the site, and it's msdynamicsworld.com/jobs. With that, I think we can start to wrap up. Eamon, thanks once again for joining me. Always fun to have you on these roundups.
Great to join you as always, Jason.
All right, and that's it for this episode. You can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. You can reach Eamon at earls, that's EEARLS, at msdynamicsworld.com. And please, for all of our updates, follow us on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.